Thanks, Arik, for introducing me. I'm Dominic, and today I'm going to talk about Navigator 2.0. Before that, let me just say a few words about me. So I've became Flutter developer expert like 2 months ago, and through that, I want to share some more Flutter knowledge with you. And today we're going to talk about Navigator 2.0, which is kind of new addition to Flutter. It gives us this kind of declarative navigation approach that we missed for a long time. So maybe let's have some kind of comparison. So why should we even care about the new navigator? So uh, first of all, so we've been using this, let's say, imperative calls. So we're going to use these two terms today a lot, imperative and declarative. So imperative is like the previous way. So where we had this navigator that push, navigator that pop, push and remove until, and so on and so on. It meant that we like were responding to some kind of events in the application uh, in like a sequence manner. One main pain point was that we could change the navigation stack from any place in the app. So sometimes completely unexpectedly, especially in large teams. Um, so you could like on one button on one place open new page, on the other you could close it and so on. Changing many pages in stack at once, let's say, was a bit cumbersome. There were some ways to do it, but in essence, it was impossible to say that we have some kind of predictable navigation stack. We had to have this kind of a mind map in our heads to tell exactly what is happening right now in the navigation stack. The more actions, the more transitions we had, the more complex this model had to be, and we were overwhelmed completely by what is happening in our app. Of course, there are many ways to improve that, improve the readability, improve the scalability, but none of them was included in Flutter out of the box. However, with Navigator 2.0, we finally received a really interesting tool to manage the Navigator stack. It's called Pages API and adds several handy properties or methods to the Navigator widget. And we'll go today through them one by one and finish the talk with the introduction of another widget called Router. So in essence, we're going to discuss and present the new declarative management of pages in Flutter. And I think this is kind of exciting if you use Flutter for more than, let's say, a few months. So we've always wanted some declarative way to manage navigation stack. Last year, this new design document was posted on GitHub. It's been a long time in the making, and finally, almost 10 months ago, we were able to see what is the Flutter team plan, what is the Flutter team take on the new navigator. The issue has been closed recently, as some parts of Navigator 2.0 started to land firstly on master channel and now on stable channel. There are, of course, more issues, more pull requests related to this, because this is like a huge overhaul of Flutter navigation system. But for now, we'll just focus on Pages API and this new router widget. Some more complex parts are out of the scope of this presentation. If you want, you can see the design document on your own after the presentation. The link will be on the last slide. The document is available online. It's publicly shared and has a lot of insight on how the Navigator 2.0 was designed. It's not like one-to-one to what was implemented in Flutter. There are some changes, especially in the naming part. But overall architecture is described in this document. So you don't have to like go through the documentation from one property to the other to have a full overview of what is happening in Flutter. So let's back up for a moment and recap ourselves. How do we manage pages in typical fashion in Flutter? So first of all, usually we respond to some user actions or maybe to some inner actions in the app by calling some special methods on the Navigator widget. For instance, when user taps on a button or when some state in our block or in our change notifier changes, we called the navigator.push, pop, or whatever. In block, you could use a block listener and respond to some state changes in your block listener. Sometimes some people use callbacks in the build methods via add post frame callback. I saw that it's not the prettiest solution, but it works. And for instance, it works if you need to immediately navigate to the user somewhere else. So the typical example would be that we just await the navigator.push, wait for the Boolean result, and we just create a new page with a material page route. This is like a very naive, simple example. I hope you are all introduced to this kind of behavior. In the second example, we want to reset the navigation stack to contain only my screen. There are also many ways to do it. This is one of them. We just push and remove until the only remaining page is my screen. So there are many more examples of how to use the alt, let's say, navigator. But I hope that you all at least have some like basic knowledge how this kind of navigation behavior works, because from now on we will compare the new navigator to this one. So there are some problems or issues or maybe drawbacks with this old kind of approach. So first of all, the navigation is a bit unpredictable, and especially the changes are unpredictable. In large teams, if you don't have tests, and it seems that maybe 70, maybe 80% from various Twitter polls, apps don't have tests. So it can be very challenging to understand and predict current and new navigation stack. Even simple backstack manipulations require hacky workarounds, especially if you are used to have some kind of nice way, maybe on Android or on iOS, to handle the backstack. It's also a bit challenging. You need to have some hacky workarounds to see what's in the current stack. You could use maybe navigation listener or something else to keep track of your navigation stack, but it still requires a lot of work. And there are multiple Stack Overflow questions asking how to maybe replace some page inside the navigation stack, or maybe add two pages at once, and so on and so on. Major thing is that the former way is hard to refactor. So typical navigation approach is hard to refactor because you, if you keep everything in one place, let's say like you have your common routes file, or maybe you have some class to handle the navigation. If you use named routes, it's of course much easier. If you statically type your routes, if you use some kind of library for that, of course, it's much easier to refactor, but in essence, it's very unwelcoming and hard to maybe reorder the sign-up flow. Let's say you have a sign-up flow that pushes new pages onto the stack. So it can be a bit difficult to see what page was opened before, or so on. Lastly, we had this property called initial route on the navigator, and it could be only set once, maybe from the deep link or from the push notification or whatever. And in all subsequent cases, no matter what you've done, you couldn't use the initial route. Of course, there were also some hacks and workarounds for that, but like from now on, from the Navigator 2.0, you may just forget about this kind of workarounds. Of course, we are used to it. It works, especially if somebody has like a year or 2 years of experience in Flutter and knows how to handle this kind of API. If you don't want to jump on the Navigator 2.0 train, that's fine. The old Navigator will still work, and you may be much more efficient working with the previous API than with the new one. But let's meet the new Declarative Navigator 2.0. So we'll be talking and using about Pages API and Router widget today. These are, let's say, two major parts of this huge refactor. So with Navigator 2.0, we get the full control over the navigation stack of the app. Like, this sounds like a lot, but this is actually how it should be described. The navigator will respond to the changes of list of pages that we supply. So this is a kind of complex sentence, but we'll describe it later in more detail. So this new API is declarative and immutable. So it is very aligned with typical Flutter approach, where you have like a stateless or stateful widget where you cannot mutate the properties of the widget, maybe in state, but not on of the widget itself. You just need to recreate it if you need to change something. So the same will happen with new pages API. So the pages are immutable objects, and we talk about them in a minute. And what's nice is that the new pages API is compatible with current imperative API. In short, if you, let's say, add or remove some new route from a page that was created with a new API. So let's say I have my home page that is created with this new API, and I create the new route from this page. This will be internally, it will create so-called pageless route for us, and we'll dig into that in a minute, because this is like a lot to cover in this in these 3 points. So in what circumstances could you use this kind of behavior? So, because it sounds complicated and maybe you just don't want to listen about it. So let's imagine a couple of use cases. For instance, if you want to rebuild your navigation stack, for example, replace some previous page in response to state changes. Let's say your user navigated to the item from your push notification in your shopping cart, and then when user goes back, you want to not close the application, but just let them go back to the categories of the products. This is one case. The other case, very common pattern, is from deep link or push notification. Let's say you need to build your navigation stack at some point, and with new pages API, you can do it on the startup of your application, define that you want to have, let's say, these 4 pages in stack from this kind of push notification. And this will be the first, let's say, list, the first order of the pages that the app will be built with. And it is very easy to do with new pages API. And finally, in case of, let's say, crash or memory warning that will kill your app, you can set up some mechanism to restore your navigation state. This could be useful, let's say, if you have a sign-up flow, like very complex, where you like maybe scan your ID or make a photo or something like that, you can restore the navigation stack with this new API pretty easily. So as an example, let's take a look at how we could add a new page under. So we have this layout, main page and details page, 2 pages in a stack, and we want to add other page between these 2 pages. So I was thinking about it, how to do it with the Navigator 1.0, the previous Navigator, and this is like a very simple example that I came up with. Of course, you could do it in many different ways. So here we have just like, so we have this situation, and what I do here is I actually remove the details page and then push other page and then push details page. But what I do is that I provide a custom page builder that disables the transition animation so that it actually happens in a single frame. So we don't see any change in the application. And after that, you have other page and details page. The source code is available on GitHub, and the link will be available at the end. But actually, what you can do with the Navigator 2.0 is much more convenient. So, sorry, the only thing that you need to do is to add a page or insert a page to the list of pages, and that's all. And for me, when I like saw this for the first time and tried it, it was amazing. Like, you just have your list of pages, put a list, insert a list in between the pages, and it works. Like, so of course, after that, you need to trigger the rebuild. So depending on what you use, it could be block, it could be provider. Here I just notify listeners. You could call set state, and I just put the other page at the proper index, and that's all. And here's the working example of that. So here is my main page. I open a new page, then that other page beneath, and as you can see, the other page is below. And again, so let's open the details page at the other page beneath, and if I go back, the other page is back. So that's kind of like no-brainer to use if you need to, let's say, add some page. It works with many different ways, so you could like replace some page, remove some page, and so on and so on. And we'll go through some examples later to see what are some kind of edge cases that you need to be aware of. But yeah, for me, even now, I feel pretty excited about this kind of behavior. So now we need to dig into some theoretical things, knowledge. So we'll go through these four sections: navigator, page, transition delegate, and router. And maybe some information will be repeated from what I told previously, but I want you to have some kind of full overview of how the new Navigator 2.0 is built. So the Navigator is a widget. It was already in Flutter 1.0. So it's very basic, like very, maybe not basic, but one of the most important widgets in Flutter. It's usually handled internally by the widgets app. So Material app, Cupertino app are implementations, are extending widgets app. So widgets app is this like base class for Flutter app, and it handles the navigator internally. But you can, for instance, have multiple navigators in the app, for instance, if you want to have some kind of nested navigation. As I mentioned before, the new Navigator API is available on Stable Channel, the new Pages API. So you can use it today if you want. There might be some minor bugs. I found some, but overall, especially on beta and dev channel, the experience is much better. So in case of this new API, you need to provide the navigator, add navigator explicitly as the home of your Material app. And the navigator will respond to the changes of the pages list that you provide. So if you remove something from this list, if you add something to this list, or replace something, the navigator will rebuild a list of routes. So again, the navigator will navigator will inflate or create a list of routes from the list of pages. And again, let's repeat, you can still use the previous API, imperative API, and it should be backwards compatible. So here's an example from the source code. So if you have your Material app, you need to provide as a home widget the new navigator. Here's the list of pages. So here I'm using the constructor list unmodifiable, but you could also use list of pages and so on. It could be also pages to list and so on. So it doesn't actually matter as long as this is a new instance of list. Then you need to provide this on-pop page callback. I will describe later, and the transition delegate. So let's go one by one through the all necessary elements that you need to set up when using new navigator. Sorry. So when constructing your widgets app or Material app, you need to explicitly provide a navigator. Here you have the list of pages, and navigator will compare this list from the previous build to the new one, and if there are some changes, then some logic will be run to determine if the stack of routes needs to be changed in some way. And you can compare the pages to routes in a similar fashion as widgets are to elements. So widgets are the immutable declarative description of elements, and pages are immutable declarative descriptions of routes. So let's say if you add a new page to the top of to the end of the list of pages, the navigator will trigger a new animation and will push new page on top of the navigation stack. Then you need to provide this onPop page callback. So for instance, if you pop your topmost page, and it only works for the topmost page with the back button, you need to keep the list of pages in sync with the with your own pages. So let's say you have your change notifier or even list in state, you need to somehow be notified that the topmost page was removed. So then you need to use this onPop page callback. And it's necessary to provide this. If you return false from that, then this page will not be popped. And if you want to be popped, then you need to remove this from the list of pages. So here I remove this from my pages collection. And finally, we have our transition delegate. Here it's commented out because Flutter will provide a default. But if you want, you can provide your custom transition delegate. This is a bit more complex, and we'll go into details in a minute. So the transition delegate will decide if the page should be, if the page transition, so if you add something, remove, replace, if it should be animated, and if it should be animated, in what order. So should it be pushed, popped, or something else? It doesn't actually create the animation. It will just decide what should be the behavior. So the page class is just an abstract class that we need to implement. And actually the page is just extending the old-fashioned route settings. And as I said before, this is an immutable description of route. So page to route is similar as stateful or stateless widget to element. It's a description of more complex object. It's the responsibility of navigator to inflate the route from page. So no longer you have to create new routes with your widgets. You just need to provide this page object, and the navigator will create the route for you. And you can control the route behavior in a createRoute method. And in a second, I will show you how this can be solved. So here is from the previous example, a list of pages. This is like blurred because we don't want to look at this. So the list of pages is just a collection. And here I have my custom page, which is an implementation of page interface. And here, what is important, each element of the list of pages needs to have a key, unique key. That's very important, that this key needs to be unique. So for instance, here I used the name, but you could use any other value for that. So for instance, if you have like a dynamic list of pages, you could just increment some number here, generate UUIDs or whatever. Of course, you could use some other classes here. So for instance, you could use custom builder page or transition builder page if you don't want to implement page. But very simple implementation of page interface is here. This is without some comments and so on, but my custom page extends page. This is generic because you want to return maybe if you want to return something from your route. So here, what I do, I just use my material page route, but this is hidden from me as a developer. So here I don't see that this is actually using material page route. So I can change it very easily in one place so that I don't have to worry about what kind of transition I have. And also if I want to have some custom transition when changing the pages, I can easily do it in one place. Also, there's another method called canUpdate if you want, for instance, have some custom logic to compare your pages. Maybe you don't want to replace some kind of pages, but this is more complex. It's out of the scope of this presentation. And this is the interface. So abstract class page extends root settings. So again, we see that this is just an old root settings, the name and the arguments that were usually passed to route settings. So let's say you wanted to maybe pass some object to the new page. It's still here. And here we have can update where the key is compared. So this is very important. If you want to have, because we have the runtime type, which is the same, yeah. So the key is very important if you want to make sure that the animation or the transition occurs. Then we have this very important part, which is transition delegate, and it decides how routes enter or exit the screen. The main responsibility of that is to answer the question, should the route transition be animated? And if yes, in what order? So imagine that we want to change the stack from this one where we have a main page and details page to this one where we have a main page and other page. So there are many ways to do it, but the easiest one is just to remove one item and add new one and then call set state. So let's think for a second, what would be the order of animations if we just replace the element in a list? So the one option is that the new page, the other page, will be pushed and the details page will be silently removed, like without any animation. After this one is on top. Or the other way is that the details page will pop and will reveal the other page below. And frankly, without any clues, you cannot say what will happen, yeah? Of course, there are some, let's say, patterns, how this kind of change should happen, but it's up to the developer or maybe to the framework designer to decide about it. And actually, by default, the first option will happen, so the new page will be pushed on top. So as you remember, at the beginning, I said that the navigator will always push the topmost page in the pages list. We will create a new route and we'll push this page on top. Of course, if you just change the list and the details page will remain the same, then nothing will happen. But if the key is different, then this new page will be pushed, and after the animation is done, this will be silently removed. And here we have an example of that. So I'm opening details, then I'm replacing this with other page again. I'm opening details. So here we have a red page, replace, and the other page is coming. And this default transition delegate is called default transition delegate and has this kind of simple logic implemented. It also works for other changes. So if you would remove the bottommost page, or if you could replace some pages inside, like most of the behavior or even all the patterns are typical what you would expect. But if you want to do it in a custom way, then you have an option for that. So here's the sample transition delegate. Sorry for the small font, but you can. I hope you can. Like we won't go deep into details here. I just want to show you that you can actually implement your own version of transition delegate. So it's like the whole page in the documentation is very long about transition delegate and the logic behind it. So first of all, we can see that this transition delegate has a method called resolve. It accepts 3 arguments: new page route history, location to exiting page route, and page route to pageless routes. And it doesn't say anything to you, does it? So here we have the short descriptions of them. So this first argument is just a list of the pages after the updates, or actually list of the routes after this update completes. So it's called, when we update the list of pages, location to exiting page route. So these are the pages that are being removed from the routes history. And the third part, page route to pageless routes, is for each of the routes that we had, you could have some pages, some routes that were pageless, so were created with this previous API. And what is actually happening is that we have these two main loops, this one and this one. In the first one, we go through the new page route history. And in the second one, we go through the location to exiting page route. Yes. And in the first one, so one important part is that this is no animation transition delegate. So this is a custom implementation of transition delegate that disables all the animation. So here we have a single page route. And if we mark the page for add, it means that this is not marked for push, this is marked for add. For add, there's no animation, because if you add new page to the stack, it means that it shouldn't be animated. But if you would mark it for push, it would be animated. And the same happens for the remove. If you mark your page route for remove, then there's no animation. If you would mark it for pop, it would be animated. So pretty simple. Of course, you can provide some more information here if you want to have some kind of custom logic. And then we go through the pageless routes to also mark them for remove this way. And we need to add this to the list of results that is being returned from here. So pretty complex, and usually you wouldn't have to implement this on your own, but you could. For instance, you could extend the default transition delegate, and for some special cases, the default transition delegate implementation is much more complex, so I didn't want to include it here. But you could, for instance, call the super on the default transition delegate, and then maybe tweak the result to your own needs, maybe for some special page or something like that. Okay, and the final boss. The final boss is called router, and this router widget is a new way to respond to navigation changes. The image, I hope the image is funny, because actually the router widget has nothing to do with the router device. So dispatch, like the main responsibility is to dispatch opening and closing pages of application. This doesn't like explain anything, yeah, but this is from the documentation. And then important part is that router wraps a navigator and configures its current list of pages based on the current app state. So we have our app state, something changes in the app state, and the router will force or will trigger navigator to rebuild or recreate the routes stack. And also one other important responsibility is to listen to the events from the operating system and eventually responding to them. So back push button, maybe some special gestures, whatever is from the operating system, some intents, like intent from the system, deep links, and some other like deep links and intents, yeah, and also back button. So these three main responsibilities. And what's fun, it's actually that the material app, that router, is available on beta channel. So if you use beta channel of Flutter, you should be able to use this new material app router. So maybe let's take a look at the example of how a router behaves. So if you use this new material app.router and you have your app state somewhere in your app, it could be over the material app under whatever, but there is some kind of class that holds your state. It could be provider, it could be block, it could be even simple state of a widget. Then the material app will have its router widget, and it's registered to listen to changes in the app state. How we do it? You do it through the router delegate, and we'll go into that in a second. Then, if some changes happen in your app state, it will rebuild the navigator with a new list of routes, pages, and the navigator will create a new list of routes. And let's say you will have route 1, route 2, and topmost route like route 3 or whatever. Then if you press a button, you call some odd tap or whatever, or some you add some event to your block, and this changes the app state, and the cycle repeats. So this is the fun part of that is that finally in Flutter we have this like declarative way of managing the stack. Before that, you would push new page here, new head, like it all would happen here, maybe through the navigator, but actually it wouldn't be like a top to bottom approach as you usually have in Flutter. And like we'll go through the router characteristics in a second. So the information flow of router is pretty complex. Like there are many delegates, and like if you haven't used delegates before, so delegates are just classes that have some kind of responsibilities and respond to some notifications or some changes. Just a fancy name for some kind of manager or whatever. Like, but we'll call them usually some delegate. They have different names. So let's have a look at this diagram. It's from the official design docs, a bit cleaned up and with the updated names. So from the left side, we have our operating system. Then depending on what happens, yeah. So if the back button is pressed, then the back button dispatcher handles that. If a new intent or the initial route is provided, then this is handled through the route information provider. Then we have our route information parser. So really nice single responsibility, and the same here. So the only thing that it does, it's providing the information from the operating system. And the only thing that it does, it just parses this information. And what is nice, you can call some async code here. So let's say if you received a new route or new URL with some details about the product or details about the book, you can access some more details from your database and provide them to your new page here. And this is really nice, especially if you want to launch your app with some data and don't want to, like, you can maybe show some loading indicator or splash screen or whatever, and immediately show the user what they need to see, because you can do it here. Then you have your router delegate implementation. So it will just call the set initial or new route, and the same will happen from the back button dispatcher, but here the only responsibility will be to dispatch the pop route. Here we have some kind of example app state. Again, some class that holds the state. So if router modified states based on system notification, yeah, so if you have a back button or new intent, it will modify the app state. You have to define how to do it. And then the app state can request some changes. So let's say you received a new push notification, you receive this notification from here. So then you can say, okay, I received the push notification, open the chat message or whatever. And if you tell it to the router delegate, it will rebuild the router, and router will create a new navigator, and this navigator will be used to create a stack of routes. Pretty complex, but I hope there will be some nice examples from the Flutter team, and I'm going to show you one in a minute. So usually, if you just want to use the default implementation, there's not much you have to do. So there's this new constructor material app.router, and you can provide these 4 arguments: route information provider, information parser, delegate, and back button dispatcher. This 1, 2, and 3 have a default implementation. Router delegate, I think, doesn't have default implementation, so you have to provide it on your own. There's some documentation that I recommend to read, and we're going to see some examples of the implementation or behavior of all of these delegates. So if you have a native event like push notification or back button, so for instance, the route information provider will retrieve the initial route requested by the operating system when the app launches, and it will provide it to you. If you want to do something with that, then you're good to go. It will listen to the new intents from the operating system. It could be like, again, some request page to be shown, maybe some in-app message or whatever. Then you have also a way to listen to requests from the operating system to pop the last route. It could be through the back button, but if you want, you could provide your own back button dispatcher. Let's say you have some kind of IoT device, yeah, and you don't have a back button, but maybe you have some kind of cage, or you have some kind of other input device, like a big red button or whatever, and you can make some kind of, you can call it a driver that will behave like a back button dispatcher. Or maybe you have some kind of VR experience and you also want to have some kind of back button behavior. So this is a place where you will look for, and you could implement your own back button dispatcher for that. And what is important is that you can also have access to the underlying logic of that. So for instance, the back button dispatcher, it has a default implementation called root back button dispatcher. And it is just using the old-fashioned widgets binding observer. I think you all heard, or I hope you all heard about it. So it's like a low-level class that is used to observe, for instance, the app lifecycle changes or pop or push changes. So this is like using this kind of API, so that you can maybe, if you want to implement your own back button dispatcher, you can use it. And I don't have much time, so let's quickly go through route information parser. So in the route information parser, here's another simple implementation. This is taken from the stocks apps. So this is a sample Flutter application from the Flutter repository. And here we have two methods. One is parse route information, and the second is restore route information. So you can omit the second one if you don't want to use like, let's say you have a Flutter web application and you change the URL. So if you want to respond to this change, you have to write this method on your own. There is some default implementation, but I haven't tested it. So if you want to maybe respond to some changes to your URL, maybe show 404 page or whatever, then this could be a place to do it. And there's also this parse route information. Here we have a statically typed route information in this example, but it could be, of course, some string and so on. And some basic logic. If you open settings page, then use return the stock settings path. One important part is that we return the synchronous feature here. So if you don't want, like, this is some kind of segue to the camel stock. If you don't want to spawn an isolate for this microtask, sorry, for this feature, so then you can just return synchronous feature and it won't create microtask. It will just immediately return this value. And the router delegate, the custom implementation, is also available in the stocks app. This is longer, so we won't show it here. Let me just switch to the new page. So this is from this stocks app, and the link will be later provided. And if we look for the router delegate, here we have our router delegate. And again, we don't have much time to go for that, but here's the sample implementation. We have our navigator key. We have our current path. We handle pop. We build pages that we want to build. So let's say if you want to settings page, if you want to stock page, of course you need to provide this pose. And here you will have your build method from the router delegate. And this is a custom class for this app. If you go here, you will see this somewhere here in the repository. But in essence, you have your navigator and you build pages for the navigator, and this will be rebuilt on each change. So this is a bit more complex than the Pages API. It requires some digging and understanding how it works. but I hope there will be some nice examples of that soon. Not much is done yet because this is still very, let's say, young concept, but more examples is coming. I hope that there will be some announcement, especially that this new router widget is on the beta channel, and beta channel is expected to land on master next month. So hopefully it will be all available. And let me go back to my presentation. And that's a lot, like that's all. And I hope that we, like, you know a bit more about Navigator right now, Navigator 2.0. And frankly, we just scratched the surface of what's coming with new Navigator. It will be powerful tool. It will be very different from the current approach. And frankly, for me, in my, like, let's say, legacy apps, it was very hard to think how could I switch to the new Navigator when starting a new app, maybe starting a demo app. I'm trying to use the new Navigator, but frankly, there is like a bit too much overload when using new router. Hopefully, it will be explained in the documentation or with samples. But frankly, like, let's wait for the stable release. If you want, you can use the Pages API right now in your fresh apps. Try to think how to refactor your own app. Nice part is that it's all backwards compatible, so you can mix and match wherever you need. And if you try it, let me know. I would be happy to see how you approach this new API. And that's all. Thanks a lot. Here are the main 3 links that I wanted to share with you. The presentation is also available if you go to my repository here, Navigator 2.0 example. And here's the link to the presentation, and also some source code of the examples that were shown during the presentation. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm giving floor back to the Arek.
Thanks, Dominic. As you said, that was a lot. So yeah, we're really happy to hear about that. So that's the perfect time to ask Dominic some questions. So please use the same Slido link for writing down your question. But in the meantime, we have 4 of them, so we can start for the first one. Question from Sander. First question, why do we have to implement on POP page ourselves? It seems that this is always necessary. Why is it not in the framework by default? The same with my custom page.
Mm-hmm. So I also was wondering why it cannot be handled automatically, but frankly, the Flutter framework does not know how internally you handle your list of pages. So you can keep it as a list of pages in your state, but it could be dynamically populated from web or whatever, and framework doesn't know what is the source of truth here. Yeah, so maybe in my simple example, I'm just removing this page from the list, but maybe the behavior would be that you don't want to remove this page from the list, but maybe remove some page below. So there are many, let's say, variables or unknowns for the framework, and I guess that was the main reason for that.
Okay, thanks for that answer. And the second question, Sander, is return synchronous future the same as return future.value?
Not sure. So I guess it could be the same, but I would have to ask and check it in the docs. The synchronous future for sure shouldn't create a new microtask. It should return the value immediately.
Okay, thanks. Another question, what about the nested navigation? Should I have, for example, 2 navigators?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want to have nested navigation like in a tab navigation manner, you would have maybe separate navigator for each of the tabs, or maybe you would like to have a nested navigator for your sign-up flow. And I do it very often. Let's say I have my like reusable navigation flow module, and it has its own navigator. And let's say maybe like this is still not migrated to the new navigator, but maybe I will migrate this to the new navigator, and I can use it in an app that is using old-fashioned navigation. So you can mix and match and use nested navigators. Of course, it requires a little bit more like attention to what are you doing with this nested navigator. But yeah, if you want, you can have multiple navigators nested.
Okay, thanks for that. And the last question, what's the way of working with results after page pop?
Mm-hmm. So I think the easiest way would be to just create some kind of class, or I would use probably some change notifier or maybe block. Maybe block is a bit too much, but change notifier would be nice. And or even just a class that will handle this result. Yeah. So let's say if I expect some result from some pop, I would capture this in this result, and then maybe if my block would require this result, I would add this as an event to the block.